All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Logan Whitlock, and I'll be your presenter today for an introduction to long-term care with a Q&A after that. Before we jump into all that, I do just want to thank everyone for showing up. I know time is your most valuable and most non-renewable resource, and I do want to make sure we're respectful of that. I would expect this presentation to take about 45 minutes, plus however long it takes to answer your questions at the end, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. So think about an hour that we'll get to spend together today. Let me go ahead and introduce you to our team, who we are, and why you should care at all what we have to say about long-term care. I'll start with myself, Logan Whitlock, financial planner. I've been working here at Wisdom Wealth Care for about 10 years, so since 2014, except for a 1 year break, if you can call it that, where I was deployed to Afghanistan as a military intelligence officer. I'm a certified financial planner, and most of what I do here is largely focused on retirement and retirement income planning. And long-term care and long-term care planning is an important piece of that retirement income plan and an important piece of your overall plan. And in case the names didn't give it away, Linus Whitlock, that's my dad. This is actually a second career for him in finance. His first was in CSI as a trace evidence examiner, but he's been in the financial industry for over 30 years. And he takes that same level of attention to detail at CSI and brings that to the financial planning team. He and Cheryl have actually been partnered since 2004. Cheryl, she's our founding partner on the law side of the business. And she's been partnered, like I said, with Wisdom Wealth Care since 2004. And the reason all that started was back in 2004, she saw how devastating bad advice can really be. It was right after the tech crash where she saw some of her estate planning clients that just lost everything they had right at the point in time where they couldn't afford to lose anything. And she decided she didn't want that to happen to her clients. So she partnered with Wisdom Wealth Care to help provide that advice to her clients. Then last but certainly not least is George McClanahan. He's a CPA and our client services coordinator. So he's just our chief problem solver. Whenever we have an issue, he's the person we go to for that. So our agenda for today, it's really 4 quick points and then a Q&A at the end. So first, why plan for long-term care in the first place? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And then two, just some quick definitions about when I say long-term care, what does that mean? What actually is it? And then three, and I think possibly the most important point, just what's the bare minimum I need to do, right? Just what is the absolute least I can get away with and still probably be okay? And then four, if I want to go above and beyond the bare minimum, what does that look like? What are my options? And then we'll do a Q&A to answer whatever questions you have after. I want to set expectations that I don't expect to be able to give fully personalized answers to all of these questions for everyone individually. But I do hope to at least provide a framework and a general direction for you to start. And again, at the end, we'll have the Q&A. If whenever you think of it, or even now, if you have a question you want to make sure that you get answered, you can at the bottom of your screen or wherever it is, there's a Q&A button. You can just click on that, enter in your question, and I'll make sure to cover that at the end during the Q&A. But if you get in now, you'll make sure you won't forget about it. And some questions might just be too private or too complicated to answer in this webinar scenario, this webinar setting. So if that happens to be the case, if there's a question that's just too complicated or too personal, we do offer, because you're at this webinar, we'll sit down with you for an hour or so and just learn a little bit about you and be able to answer your questions more fully. If that's something you might be interested in, you can see our email and phone number at the bottom. It's info@wisdomwealthcare.com. Just shoot us an email, give us a call, and we'll set up a time to make that happen. So let's get on with the feature presentation. So I want to start with, why should I plan for long-term care? Is this actually something that most people are going to need? And my answer, of course, because I'm doing the webinar, is yes. So this is from longtermcare.gov. So this is straight from the government. They've done some big research on this. Someone turning 65 years old today has almost a 70% chance of needing some type of long-term care service. So this could be at home, in a facility, but at least some type of care. There's about a 69% chance you'll need that. And if you need care, the average length tends to be about 3 years. For women, a little bit longer. For men, a little bit shorter. Women just tend to outlive us guys and just need a little bit more care on average. And the other big point is, while not everyone will need care for an extended period of time, about 20% of people will need care for more than 5 years. And so the way the math works out, if there's a 65-year-old couple, so two people, there's over a 1 in 3 chance, or about a 36% chance, that at least one of them will need care for more than 5 years. So that could be 5 years in a day, all the way up to 15 years or longer. And this is one of the significant issues that could cause a retirement to fail if you needed an extended long-term care stay. So how much does this actually cost, right? What are the costs? And these are in 2023 numbers. This is what they came out to be. I live in North Carolina, so I'm doing the national average and North Carolina. So if you needed care at home, the national average and the North Carolina average is going to be somewhere between $4,000 to $5,000 per month. This is about 40 hours a week. So about your average work week, about 8 hours a day for 5 days a week. If you needed less, of course, it's cheaper. If you needed more than that, it gets more expensive. Assisted living tends to be around that same cost. So assisted living is very similar in cost to home health care for that 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then nursing home, of course, gets significantly more expensive, something in that $8,000 to $8,500 a month range. And while these are the national and state averages, my personal anecdotal experience has been our clients, especially in the assisted living category, tend to spend a little bit more than this, something closer to 6,000, even 6,500, because it tends to be that if you're choosing the place you want to go live, you want to choose a nicer place, especially if you have the funds to do it. And so if you're around needing that care now, these are the averages. That said, maybe you're 60 or 65 now, and you likely won't need care for another 20 years. What does that look like? So this is just for North Carolina. We're looking at 20 years from now, assuming 3% inflation. 3% inflation is, I think, very conservative, especially long-term care and medical expenses tend to inflate a little bit faster than the baseline inflation average. At least they have historically. So this is close to a best case scenario. With home care, it goes from about 4,000 to 7,700, almost 8,000. Your assisted living goes up to a little bit over $9,000, and nursing home over $15,000. This isn't to scare you or tell you that it's going to be absorbently expensive in the future. This is just to note a few things. Your plan's going to look different depending on how old you are. If you're 75 now, your plan's going to look different than if you're 55. And while some of your income, like Social Security, is going to be inflation adjusted, some of it might not be. So especially if a lot of your income is coming from, say, a pension or a guaranteed annuity, or your investments are more fixed income like bonds, something like that, especially if you're drawing off them, It may not keep up with inflation, and that's something we need to keep in mind when we're planning for long-term care, especially an extended long-term care stay. So I've talked about long-term care for a while. What actually is it? What are some different types of long-term care? Um, Oxymoronically, long-term care can be a lot of different things. It can be either over a very short time period or over a long, extended period of time. It can be at your home or in a facility. It can be by a medical professional or just an unpaid family member providing care because you can't do it yourself. There are four broad categories that I'm going to go over in a little bit more detail now. So, first, home health care. This tends to be the most common form of long-term care, tends to be care at home. The reason why it's the most common is it can be free, or at least you don't pay for it monetarily. Oftentimes, it'll be family, think spouse or children, friends, or other unpaid caregivers who will come into your house and help do things like bathe you, take you to the bathroom, get you dressed, cook your meals, help you eat, those sorts of things. But while you may not pay for that financially, there is a cost. And so most caregivers, I think 70%, suffer some sort of work related difficulties because of their caregiving duties. And and this makes sense because most often the person giving care is either the spouse or the children. And on average, you start needing long-term care in your mid 80s. So if you're in your mid 80s, your spouse probably is too. And that providing care is going to put strain on them. Similarly, if you're in your mid 80s, your kids might be 60, 65, maybe they're still working, have children of their own. Adding that extra stress to their lives can cause some difficulties. And while one financial extreme is free, it can also vary widely in cost. If you have to pay for a caregiver to come out to your house and be there 24/7, round the clock care, that can get really, really expensive really, really quick. So think something like $15,000 to $20,000 a month for round the clock care. That's $25 to $30 an hour, 24 hours a day, like $700 to $800 a day. It happens and it gets really expensive. So another type is adult daycare and or respite care. Oftentimes, home care and respite care can go in tandem. The the adult daycare or respite care is often used for if there's a caregiver that just needs a break. Maybe they need to go run errands, maybe they need to go to work or just take a week off for vacation. There are facilities that usually not 24/7, but there are some that'll let you stay for a week or so. And this tends to be just as a break for the at-home caregivers. The next type, I lump these together, the assisted living and independent living. This is where you're living at a facility where your care is more tailored to what you need. It can be help with your activities of daily living, help with just daily tasks like taking your medication, cleaning, meals, laundry, stuff you need to do to live. Often it's not as the medical care isn't as intensive, isn't as structured as it would be at a nursing home. There is one exception to that, where if it's a continuing care retirement community or a CCRC, that's a community, that's a facility where they have independent living, assisted living, and nursing home all in one facility. So you would be able to move from whichever one of these made the most sense for you at that time. At these facilities, residents tend to be, well, more independent, as the name suggests, being able to cook or drive and be mostly independent. The next and the highest level of care is nursing home. What really separates a nursing home as the highest level of care is a few things. The facility has to have a special license and has to have healthcare professionals on staff. It tends to be the most expensive, and we're going to get this in a minute. It's the only level of care that Medicaid will pay for. Medicaid won't pay for care at home. Asterisks, in a few exceptions, they will, but almost as a rule, Medicaid's not going to pay for care at home or assisted or independent or adult daycare or respite care. Nursing home's the only one they're going to end up paying for. So, what's the bare minimum? The bare minimum you need to do to prepare for long-term care. A few things. One is just make sure you have your legal documents in place. So I'm going to go through these, but there's your durable power of attorney. This is where you give someone else the power to make decisions for you when you can't make them anymore. Similarly, your healthcare power of attorney is that same thing, but for medical decisions instead of your financial decisions. Along with the healthcare power of attorney, you also want the HIPAA authorization and your living will or your advance directives. HIPAA authorization allows your representative to just get medical information from providers, because if they don't have it, those doctors can't give out your information. And living will tells your representative what measures you want to keep you alive. Think respirator, feeding tube, things like that. Make sure your wishes are taken care of. And your last will and testament, oftentimes called your will. And this is what tells the government, tells the courts how you want your assets dispersed when you die. And this is also the only place, if you happen to have minor children, where you can say, I want my child to be cared for by this person, called a guardian. And so if you don't have your will, especially if you have minor children, you have to get that done. And on a slight tangent, if you don't have a will, your estate will go through and test it, which means the government gets to decide who gets your money, and it may not be what you expect. So if you have a spouse and kids in North Carolina, they're going to split your estate, and it won't all go to your spouse. So if you don't have a will, definitely something you need to look at and get fixed. So after you get your legal documents in place, have a plan, have a clearly articulated wishes for whoever holds those power of attorneys, whoever is the trustee, if you happen to have a trust, for what you want to happen. And that could be, I want to go to this facility, or I want you to spend every dollar giving me the best care, or whatever it happens to be. Make sure what you want is clearly articulated, preferably written down, but at least clearly communicated to your powers of attorney or your trustees if you happen to have a trust. And then the last one is just a plan for who's going to pay and how. And I don't care if it's you decide I'm going to pay for it out of my pocket, if the government's going to pay, if your kids are going to do it, or if an insurance company is going to pay. However you decide to set it up, it is fine, but make sure you have a plan for how that's going to happen, and make sure any other parties are aware if they're part of your plan, particularly if it includes family, like your children or your spouse. So that's the bare minimum you need to do. Really, everyone should have these things in place, regardless of where you fall. But if you want to go above and beyond that, what should you do? Well, let's first talk about what isn't a good plan. So, Medicare isn't a solution. Not Medicaid. Medicare isn't a good plan. Let me tell you why. So, from Medicare, most people are going to get no help at all for long-term care. In the absolute best case scenario, if you happen to have a qualifying hospital stay with a qualifying event prior to needing to go to recovery, Medicare could pay for some percentage of your first 100 days. But that's it. After that, you're completely on your own. Similarly, other health insurance isn't an option. Most health insurance is going to be similar to Medicare, where they're only going to cover very short-term medically necessity to recover from an acute incident, like if you fell and broke your hip or got in a car accident or something like that. Medicare is on the better end of what's covered for health insurance. So that's not a good plan. But what is? So I'm going to break it down essentially into three different groups and tell you what I would in general recommend as the starting point for each group. So one solution is traditional Medicaid. So what is Medicaid? So Medicaid is a government program, government insurance that everyone who's ever had a W-2 has paid into. Everyone that's ever had self-employment tax, you paid into Medicaid. It's part of that payroll, FICA tax. You paid into it. And part of Medicaid is if you're unable to pay for your own nursing home care, Medicaid will cover that. But of course, there are some stipulations. So if you're a single individual, right, if you're not married, you have to have under $2,000. So that's your bank account, your investments, your IRA, everything under $2,000. And you're allowed to have a burial life insurance policy, a car, and a house. That's about it in order for Medicaid to cover your nursing home care. If you're married, it's a little bit more generous. They allow the well spouse, they call it the community spouse, to keep up to half of your couple's combined assets up to a maximum of about 154,000. So if as a couple you have $300,000, say in an IRA, you can keep up to half of that up to $154,000 as the well spouse. If this happens to be the best plan for you, don't feel bad about using government insurance because you've been paying for it every paycheck. Typically, traditional Medicaid is the best plan for people who essentially can't afford anything else. So if you're in retirement or close to it, and you're barely going to make it as it is without having to look at buying long-term care insurance or doing relatively expensive advanced Medicaid strategies, this might be your best bet is to just plan for traditional Medicaid. On the other extreme is self-pay. So if when I was going through how much long-term care cost, if you saw, $8,000-9,000 a month for a nursing home, and your first thought was, oh great, I'll save money because I'm not spending on everything else in my life. Maybe this is right for you. If spending $8,000 or $9,000 a month on healthcare for you, and if you married your spouse, just isn't that big a deal for you, then maybe you don't need to do any extra planning beyond the bare minimum. There could still be some benefit in getting a little bit of leverage from long-term care insurance or some advanced planning strategies, but it's more of a nice to have rather than you have to have. And then there's that messy middle, and that's where I'm going to spend most of the rest of our time together talking about. It's where you can't really afford to pay for a nursing home or those higher levels of care, but there's no way you're really going to qualify for traditional Medicaid either. This is where you're able to comfortably retire. You're able to comfortably live on the income and the assets that you have. But if you or your spouse needed to go into a nursing home and that bill was $8,000 or $9,000, that would totally derail your plan, your retirement. This is what we're going to talk about primarily today is long-term care insurance and some advanced Medicaid planning strategies. So let's talk about long-term care insurance. So there are plenty of different types of long-term care insurance. It's a blanket term for paying a company, a long-term care insurance company, to cover some part of your long-term care risk. There are a few different types, so I'll get into them in a little bit more detail in a minute. There's traditional long-term care, which tends to be the least expensive, but if you don't use it, it goes away. So you pay a certain amount, maybe every month until you die or you need care. maybe just one time, but if you don't use it, you lose it. And then there's a life insurance or a hybrid long-term care. This is where you combine long-term care insurance with life insurance in one policy. These tend to be a little bit more expensive, but if you don't use the long-term care part, you at least get the life insurance as a consolation prize, or at least your beneficiaries do. The third is annuities with long-term care riders. Typically, these will give you the least bang for your buck, but they're really easy to qualify for. The underwriting isn't as difficult. And there are a couple other trade-offs and benefits I'll get into. So traditional long-term care. Typically, the way these work is you pay an annual premium every year until either you need long-term care or you die. Typically, the insurance company is gonna either have a daily amount they'll pay or a monthly amount they'll pay up to a limit. And the example I have on the screen is they might pay $6,000 a month or maybe $200 a day for a maximum of 432,000 for 6 years. Typically, if you don't use the whole $6,000, they'll extend the length. So let's say you only needed $3,000 a month. Instead of lasting 6 years, it lasts 12. That's typically the way they work. You are able to pay for them, most of them in either one lump sum or over a period of 5 or 10 years. But typically, if you're going for this option, it's because you want to get the most bang for your buck with the least upfront payment, and pay until you need it is the way to do the least upfront cost. So some of the positives of the traditional long-term care is what I said. Typically, you get the most possible long-term care benefit, the least amount of initial premium. And one of the benefits exclusive to the traditional long-term care is it qualifies for what's called partnership with the state. This is definitely true in North Carolina. It is also true in most other states. If you live somewhere else, check with your state's rules. But the way this works is the insurance company partners with the state, and they let you keep a larger nest egg and still qualify for Medicaid. So in this example I have up top, if you got a policy that covered 432,000 and you use it up in your 6 years, you would then be able to get on Medicaid with an additional $432,000 of assets. And this can help sort of balance that. I want to save my nest egg, but also I don't want to spend a huge amount on long-term care. The cons, the obvious one, if you don't need it, you don't get any benefit. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. You can pay for your premium to get returned, but that makes it more expensive. And at that point, why bother with this version? Also, your premiums, if you go with the pay until you need it, your premiums will likely go up. The insurance company has to go to the state board of insurance and request an increase. They can't do it on their own authority. They can't do it on just one individual. But I have seen increases of upwards of 50% of your premium in 1 year. It has happened, and I expect maybe not to that magnitude, but increases to happen again in the future. So, hybrid insurance, life insurance, long-term care. An encompassing term for these is asset-based long-term care. They tend to be a little bit more costly, but if you don't use your long-term care benefit, at least you have your life insurance benefit. It just wraps the two together. So the obvious benefit is if you don't use it, you at least get something out of it. And these are, I've seen more of these done in a one and done, where you pay one single premium and your policy is completely paid up. One, something like the client put $50,000 down to purchase the policy, and then on day one, their death benefit was about $65,000, and if they needed long-term care, they could get 3 times that spread over 6 years. So it allows you to get an immediate death benefit and immediate leverage on your long-term care benefit. That this particular policy had an inflation rider built in as well. So the long-term care benefit increased over time. And usually these are easier to qualify for. Not the easiest, but a little bit easier because the insurance company knows they're going to have to pay out either way, whether they pay out for long-term care or life insurance. They're going to have to pay out anyway, so the underwriting isn't quite as strict. But you pay for that. It tends to be more expensive up front, and it's typically not as attractive for older adults. If you're, especially if you're 70 or older, these get really expensive really quick. And typically these aren't partnership qualified, so that they don't have that state partnership usually with these hybrid policies. Annuities with long-term care riders. So not all annuities, but some have riders, which are like add-ons to an annuity that allows you to get extra benefits if you need long-term care. Typically, these are linked to you needing to qualify for 2 of 6 activities of daily living, which we can get into in a minute. But you have to need long-term care in order for these riders to pay out. The ones that I've seen recently in the past would be, let's say you had an annuity that would pay you 5% income for life. Instead of that, it might double to 10% income for a period of time to help cover that long-term care need. Of course, there are some benefits. If you don't need the long-term care, you have all the other benefits and trade-offs the annuity offers. And this is the easiest one by far to qualify for. Often the qualification for these is as simple as, are you currently in a nursing home? If no, you're accepted. I have some where they don't have any qualification questions at all, just a period where you might have to wait a year or two before the long-term payments start. The trade-offs, usually you get the least leverage, the least benefit for the amount of funds you put in, for the amount of long-term care benefit that you actually get out. And it requires you to purchase an annuity, which can be a large upfront expense. And the long-term care benefit is often, it's not tax advantaged. So with the previous two, with the traditional and asset-based long-term care, they're actual long-term care policies. So these, whenever the benefit comes out, it's tax-free as long as you're using it to pay for long-term care. With the annuity, that's not the case. You have to pay tax on it, just as you would with any other annuity when it comes out. That said, if you're having to pay, $8,000 plus for long-term care, you can use that as a tax deduction, as a medical deduction. So it's not as egregious, but it is still a trade-off. So other than insurance, what other options do you have? Because sometimes you don't have the assets to purchase insurance. You don't have the health to actually qualify. What other options do you have? Typically, these Medicaid planning strategies are oftentimes best if you just received a diagnosis and you're in we need to do something quick. Not I'm 55, 60 years old, looking for what can I do to plan ahead of time. What are your options? So option one is a Medicaid trust. And this is often best if you just received a diagnosis and you know you're going to need long-term care in the next few years, and you have a significant nest egg that you want to protect. The other strategy is a 1% deed or a ladybird deed. They're interchangeable. And this is often best if you have a house or some real estate that you want to protect. It's not very flexible, but it's very powerful for doing one thing and one thing only. And that's protecting real estate from Medicaid spend down. It's great at that one thing. And then speaking of Medicaid spend down, or the burial or life insurance policies. If you're close to qualifying for Medicaid, but not quite there are some strategies you can get to just spend a little bit more to get you to qualify for Medicaid quickly. So, the Medicaid trust. This is the big, complicated, powerful solution that isn't right for everyone, but it can help save hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is where you would shift your assets into an irrevocable trust. And the big trade-off with this is it's not legally controlled by you, it's not legally controlled by your spouse. It could be your kids, it could be another family member, it could be a friend, but it's not you or your spouse. It's not legally controlled by you. And then after 5 years, after the 5 year look back period, these assets are considered not in your estate when looking at Medicaid. So you would be able to qualify for Medicaid and they would not look at the assets within this trust. It allows you to save a very wide variety of assets. This could be stocks, bonds, this could be real estate, this could be even a family business. You could put the shares of your family business inside this Medicaid trust and it would be protected. And you still have access to the assets through your trusted third party. So through your child or through whoever is the trustee, they could take a trustee distribution to themselves from the trust and then gift that to you as the grantor. You can't take it directly, but there are ways to get you assets even though they're in this irrevocable trust. The trade-offs are it can get really expensive and really complicated, and you have to wait 5 years before those assets are considered safe for Medicaid. And you have to have someone that you really trust implicitly to make this possible. Maybe that's your kids, maybe that's your uncle or sibling, whatever it is. You have to have someone because they're going to be in legal control of the assets that you put into this trust. And if you don't trust them, then this just isn't going to work. It's a really powerful tool, but it's also really easy to mess up if you don't know what you're doing. So if this is something that might make sense for you, definitely get in contact with an estate planning attorney. At Cheryl David, we do this all the time. If you mess it up, it can get bad pretty quick. So next option, the 1% deed or ladybird deed. This is one of the simpler options, and it's good for saving a house for Medicaid. If you get nothing else from this presentation, don't sell your home to pay for a nursing home care. Just don't do that. Don't sell the house. You can protect it with one simple deed. What you do is you make someone else, maybe your kids, maybe someone else, a 1% owner in your home or any other piece of real estate. Then that asset is protected from Medicaid and it won't pass through your estate. So Medicaid won't be able to go back and take it. The way Medicaid works is after they pay for your care, let's say they paid $200,000 for your care, and then you die, they're going to try to go back after your estate to try to take that $2,000 and pay themselves back. But if your home or your assets don't go through your estate and they pass by direct ownership, like something like a 1% deed, Medicaid can't take it back because it doesn't go through the estate. So this allows you to immediately protect real estate from Medicaid and they can't get it back. It can be pretty affordable for the level of protection you get. And as the owner, you maintain 99% control. You still get to live there. You still get to decide whether it gets sold or what happens to that property. You get control of it because you're still the owner. It's just someone else is a 1% owner just for Medicaid purposes. It's great as it protects real estate from Medicaid, but that's about all that it does. And in order to do this, you have to have the proper legal documents in place. If For example, your parents have a house you want to protect, but they're not able to sign anymore, and they don't have the proper legal documents, the proper powers of attorney. This option just isn't available anymore, and neither are a lot of the other ones we spoke about. But if you have your legal documents set up, this is still an option. And then the last one before we get on with the Q&A is Medicaid spend down. So if you're relatively close to qualifying for Medicaid and you know you're going to need nursing home care for Medicaid, there are ways to just spend down, so you actually become eligible. One way to keep assets, especially if you're really close, is a burial policy. So it's $10,000 or less. That is a life insurance policy. You would essentially put $9,900 into this insurance policy. You get $10,000 worth of benefit, and then that is protected from Medicaid, and you're able to keep it and still qualify. The other ways is just spending on things you're allowed to have and still qualify for Medicaid. So this could be spending on home repairs, or you're allowed to have a car and be on Medicaid, or even taking your family on a vacation. One thing you can't do is cash gifts to, well, anyone except for your spouse, because these gifts are going to be tracked by Medicaid, especially if they're within 5 years of you applying, and Medicaid's going to penalize you for that and make you pay back that money. This strategy allows you to get benefit from your assets, right? Whether it's a vacation or a home repair, and it's easy to do. You just spend the money, but it's really only practical if you're pretty close to being able to qualify for Medicaid already, and it requires you to spend the assets, so you won't have access to them anymore. So a few quick takeaways from today's presentation, and then we'll get on to the Q&A. One, I covered this already, but don't sell your house to pay for a nursing home. It's the easiest asset to protect. You're allowed to have your house, still qualify for Medicaid, and get your care paid for. In our experience, the level of care that you receive in a nursing home, it doesn't matter who's paying. It doesn't matter if it's you, the insurance company, or the government. It doesn't matter who's paying for it. What matters the most is who's looking out for you. Are your family or your friends showing up and keeping track of the care you're getting is much more applicable to the level of care that you'll receive. And two, make sure you get your bare legal documents in place so you're able to perform the strategies that you need so that maybe your family members and your loved ones can do what they need to do in order to take care of themselves. And then three, have a plan. Know what you want to do. Know who's going to pay for what, how it's going to happen, who are your powers of attorney and your trustees, and make sure that they're all on the same page for what's going to happen. And like I talked about earlier, I focus on retirement and retirement income planning. A large part of that is risk management. A large part of risk management is long-term care planning. And that's only a piece of what we do. So what we want to do is a holistic thing, is make sure your risk management plan, your investments, your retirement income plan, your taxes, your estate plan, make sure that all works together. They all complement each other to help meet your goals. So if you think it might be valuable to have an hour or so sit down with a CFP just to learn a little bit about you and answer some of your questions, let us know. Give us an email at the info@wisdomwealthcare.com or give us a call at the number below. And we'll set a time just to talk and learn a little bit about each other. So moving on to the Q&A portion, I see some people have put in some questions. I'm gonna take this time to get a quick drink of water, I promise, and then give everyone some time to put in some questions if you think of any more, and then I'll go through the questions and answer them, and then we'll go on about our day. Thank you everyone for coming up. All right, so I see we've got some questions. One question is, my policy got more expensive. Is it worth it to increase the elimination period? And typically with these, like I talked about, if you have traditional long-term care, it can get more expensive. This particular one, the guy said went up 46%. Usually, as a general rule, what we find is if you've had that policy for a long time, that's the best coverage you're ever going to get, even if it increases in price. So if you can afford that increase, you're not going to be able to get better coverage. It could make sense to look at, oftentimes they'll give you different options for them, like you talked about, increasing the, the elimination period from maybe 90 days to 180 days, or decrease the amount of daily payout. If you can afford the increase, you'll never get better. So if you can afford it, our most common piece of advice is to pay it. But if you want us to sit down with you, review your policy, and actually look at what it is, let us know, and we'll be happy to sit down with you for a little bit and talk about that. Let's see. Yeah, there's another question about long-term care policies that are qualified plans. What what I think that means, and if I'm not correct, correct me, is whether they are partnership with the state. And I think I covered that, at least touched on it a little bit earlier. What that means is whatever the insurance company pays for, you will be able to keep that much extra and still qualify for long-term, still qualify for Medicaid. So for example, if that policy paid for $250,000 of long-term care coverage over whatever time period, and then that coverage ran out and you needed Medicaid because you didn't have the assets for it, you would be allowed to keep an extra $250,000 in addition to the $2,000 Medicaid lets you keep a car and a house and your burial policy and still qualify for Medicaid, even though you have that extra $250,000 of assets. Um, if that answers your question, great. If not, let me know and we'll try to go back over it again. I see a question about what long-term care cover companies are there in North Carolina and what conditions prevent long-term care. Short answer, there's a lot of them that do long-term care, particularly in the asset-based hybrid long-term care. There's a dozen or so, and each company is going to have their own conditions that either prevent you from getting care or cause it to be more expensive. Us at Wisdom Wealth Care, we're not captive to any one insurance company. We can find a policy for any of them. So if you're interested, let us know. We can scope it out, see which company is best for you, depending on what conditions you have. Let's see. I have a question about nursing homes and Medicaid beds. The short answer is yes. Oftentimes, some of the facilities will limit the amount of availability for Medicaid. And Medicaid typically is going to pay for double occupancy. So if you're in Medicaid, has to be in a nursing home, and typically they're not going to let you have your own private room. They'll make you double up with someone else because they want to save money. And Medicaid typically won't pay as much as if you're private pay. That the government they have scale. So many institutions, many facilities don't have unlimited Medicaid beds because they're not getting paid as much for them. One extra addition to this is continuing care retirement facilities, so CCRCs. Those are facilities where oftentimes you'll start at the assisted living and then move up through the levels of care all the way to nursing home. And with most of those, they have a guarantee that if they let you in, they'll never kick you out, even if you run out of money and need to go on Medicaid. So in that particular scenario, if you qualify financially and if you're healthy enough to get in and they accept you, those CCRCs, continuing care retirement communities, they'll guarantee you a Medicaid bed even if you run out of money. So those are one place to look if you're still able to financially and health qualify for those. So I see a question about, it seems like a question of how to pay for long-term care coverage, whether it's one lump sum or whether it's pay over time. And typically, if you have the lump sum cash on hand to do it, typically that's the best way to do it. Because if you pay with one lump sum, they can't increase the price on you. If you pay it once, they're not, you can't have that 46%, 50% increase in a single year for your coverage. One middle ground is they call it a 5-pay or a 10-pay, where they'll, well, just like it sounds, they'll say, X amount for 5 years or X amount for 10 years, and they'll guarantee they won't increase the price. It's just spread out over 10 years. So you'll pay a little bit higher dollar value than you would if you paid in a lump sum, but it lets you spread it out over time. So let's say you're 55 and you're wanting to retire at 65. That lets you pay it over time. And then when you're retired at 65, you're all covered and you don't have any more payments and they can't increase it on you. I have a question about what happens if an insurance company goes out of business, and there's two levels to that. What usually happens is another insurance company will buy them out, and then that secondary insurance company will guarantee your coverage, and everything essentially is the same except the name changes. If the company goes out of business and something goes wrong and there's no backup, there is the state insurance board has insurance for insurance that each insurance company is paying. So if they go bankrupt, if they go out of business, you'll still have that coverage through the state. They call them SHIPs. It's state held insurance policy, I think is the acronym. So even if the insurance company goes out of business, you'll still have your insurance. It is kind of a hassle to go through. So we do vet the insurance companies that we look at to make sure they're highly rated and not going to go out of business. But if something catastrophic happens and they do, you're covered. I think I've answered all the questions that I saw in chat. If there are any more, I'm gonna give us maybe 1 or 2 more minutes to get those answered. If not, I want to thank everyone for showing up. This ran about as long as I expected, almost hit that hour mark, but not quite. So thank you everyone for showing up. I'm not seeing any more questions. So again, if you do happen to have any questions, give us a call, give us that email. Let me put the number back up on screen for you. It's that info@Wisdom Wealth Care, or our phone number is 336-218-9344. So if you do have any questions or just want to set a time to talk for an hour or so, give us a call. And thank you very much, everyone, for coming out. I'm gonna go ahead and end this here. Thank you for your time. Everyone have a great day.